do I ready, aim, fire, or do I ready, aim? There's some people that ready.
Yeah.
And they never, ever get to the point.
Paralysis
And then
analysis.
there's other people that like aim, fire, I should have done some research, right? Right? And then there's some people that fire.
Yeah.
And they have no aim and they have no ready.
Yeah. I would like, this is what I'd like. Mm-hmm. That whatever decisions I make, I never have any negative consequences of.
Well, that's not going to happen. So sorry, girl. Well, hello, Mary.
Well, hello, Gillian. Look at us in this new environment.
I know.
We're like fancy pants.
Well, the fact that we have many venues to choose from.
We have just so many venues to choose from.
And it's just because life throws curves at us.
That's right.
And we have to adapt.
We have to pivot.
We do, pivoting.
Yeah. We are really good at pivoting. Well, kind of, maybe.
We are.
Yeah. Other than every time we read these chapters from this book, Never Go Back by Henry Cloud.
No.
We have a private conversation where we're going back and forth. And
you should see the things we say about these chapters.
There's some harsh words that we say.
There are words.
There are words.
And they're not pleasant.
No, because
these are ouchy chapters.
But you know what? We love you so much. We're willing to endure for you.
Well, this is our lab rat status. We're testing out all the material. This is Gillian and Mary approved, not only because we are working through it and we have not arrived, but because it continues to challenge us.
Yes. And the truth is, when we picked up the book, we only looked at the first few chapters.
Well,
we didn't read ahead. And
no.
We got, can we skip some chapters?
No, because this is my memory. I read this book. I've recommended it to so many people.
Okay.
And then I forget really what's in it. I just know it was good.
Isn't this the story of our life?
Yep.
Yeah. We were just together on the weekend talking about this whole freedom session process that we had gone through. Mm-hmm. And the group, we're all looking at each other blankly.
Yeah, because we were looking for a particular thing that somebody wanted to make a point about. And in the Freedom Session series, there are 3 books, which, took like 16 weeks each?
Yeah.
And for the life of us, none of us could remember which book it was in, where it came from. And then it ended up not being even in that.
Yeah, and then I suggested that we do a review session, and everybody looked highly resistant.
Yes, we don't want to go back there.
No.
Okay, so actually, that leads us into our whole...
What a segue.
Yeah, I know. So this is what we're doing. I'm going to read the title because we're changing things up a little bit.
Yeah.
Dr. Cloud, don't, have a conniption. So chapter 8, never again neglect to do due diligence.
Okay. What does that mean?
Well, it just means that go into things like, knowing what you're getting into.
Well, we're calling this chapter Eyes Wide Open.
True.
Because we put a lot of thought and creativity into this title. And I think the main thing is we go into situations where we feel like we know what we're getting into. Yep. We make impulsive decisions and we don't really reflect on it much. And then we end up having some consequences that maybe we didn't expect. And then we're able to rationalize it away. Yeah.
And I mean, this is true of when sometimes we're making kind of a major life decision about like a new home or something or a new job.
Yeah.
And we tend to minimize some of the areas that we should poke around a bit, right? It could look really good on the outside.
Right.
But the foundations or the history of the company or whatever are a little dicey.
Well, we have a few principles that act here because we've talked about this before. Like 100% of our decisions goes to the emotional part of our brain, number 1.
Yes.
And then number 2, we have a lot of biases. So we pay attention to what we choose to pay attention to. So whether it's a house or a new partner or somebody that I am attracted to be friends with, I'm going in with my emotions.
Oh,
and then I'm interpreting with my filters. So how objective is that?
It's not objective at all.
I know. And then if I don't take time to really ponder and get feedback, then I can go plunging into some difficult, decisions that will lead to difficult consequences.
Yeah. So during the pandemic, I had quite a few people reach out to me because they were interested in getting a dog. right? And
Yes.
the one thing I said to them very clearly, do not go see the puppies. Don't. Do your research first. Right?
Yes.
Do your research first, because if you do your research first and you know what you're looking for, and then you go see the puppies, at least you have something to have a standard about.
Well, you
And
should
because
not-
you're
sorry.
emotionally charged as soon as you see them.
Well, that's what I mean.
And so are they.
I know. Like, don't go see puppies unless you expect to bring some home.
Exactly.
That's the way it works.
True.
So I think doing the due diligence. So he writes in here, which I really like. Here's the principle. Because I have to admit, when I hear the word due diligence, my eyes cross, and I'm like, that just sounds so businessy,
Yeah.
so analytical, and you know how analytical I'm not, like this pros and cons things. But he says, I owe it to myself.
Yes.
And I'm obligated to myself to pay attention in the proper way through a certain necessary crucial time to carefully work out to find out what I think I'm getting is actually what I'm getting.
You know, when he said that, you owe it to yourself. I owe it to myself.
Yeah.
To make sure that I am getting what I think I'm getting.
Right.
That, like, take the selfish approach.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I'll say from my history, because Peter, my husband, he is much more analytical. He takes his time in making decisions. He weighs the pros and cons, all of which are amazing strengths.
Yeah.
But it goes against my style, which is jump first and figure it out later. So
Yes.
in the past, I used to find it frustrating because I felt like he was always raining on my parade. But over the years, I've learned to appreciate that, so that I might have a thought and an impulse, but if I don't check it with him, then likely I haven't thought through all the various implications of it.
Well, I was walking somebody through a major decision that they have to make.
Yeah.
And they have two opportunities in front of them. And, you know, the pro-con list was actually a huge tool in order to do this, because there are pros and cons. But what was happening was, one just looked better because of the monetary value.
Yes.
But when we kind of hashed it out, it was like a matter of maybe a couple $100. It wasn't a lot of money.
Right.
Right? So
Right.
it seems sometimes like that's the lure, like,
Right.
oh, well, that's a better option just because
absolutely.
more money in my pocket.
Yeah.
But in fact, it really wasn't that great a deal.
Yeah, it's true. We can just kind of focus on the one criteria and forget about all the others. And the other thing, too, is what we think we need at the time that we're about to make that decision can really color our judgment. So if I'm feeling lonely and I'm looking for a friend, it could color my judgment. So the very first person I meet who seems kind of nice, I might jump whole hog and say, yeah, let's do this together. So I remember we were on a trip a while back, and we met this lovely young woman, and she tells us that this was her first cruise, and she was going on with a woman she had met at a club.
Oh, that's like my nightmare.
So it sounded like they were having a good time. We saw them and they were interacting, having a really great time. But by midway through the cruise, we saw her again on her own. We had to split up. We had to go and ask for separate rooms. We couldn't handle it.
Oh, boy.
But her need to have fun and to have friendship was so strong that it colored her judgment.
Yeah.
So how often do we do that?
Oh, all the time.
Right?
All the time.
And we're not going to give any examples of that because that's just too vulnerable.
Especially matters of the heart, right?
Yes.
That's the tricky bit.
That is so true.
So I think this idea of due diligence is that you have some guardrails and a framework, and you can sort of pull the emotion out if you can and stick to the data.
Right. Well, I would say that the emotions are still an important consideration because when it comes to matters of being a heart-centered type, but it can't be the only thing.
No.
So consider it from the emotional, logical, but also like even gut sense.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you look at it from that standpoint and you're being balanced and taking in data, and we've talked about this before, the centers of intelligence, according to the Enneagram, every single center, our heart, our mind, and our gut has actual neurons that are taking in information. So why do we ignore part of it? Let's take in all of it. But we have to slow down to be able to take in all of that.
And I always find that oftentimes when people get into trouble, myself included, it's that there's a deadline.
Yeah.
Like there's this deadline looming. This sale is only good for the next 48 hours or whatever. There's like you go to Costco and there's only so much of the product there on the shelf. So you have to buy it.
Right.
So it's an emotionally charged, you might miss the boat on whatever it is. And I always find that a time crunch is just a killer for decision making.
Well, it's not even a real time crunch.
No, it's not. It's
one that we perceive it, yes, because of an anxiety of missing out.
Right.
Or whatever it might be. Or if I don't choose this person, maybe someone better is not going to come along.
That's right.
So I better get what I can. You know what I mean? Right?
I know. I know when you say it like that, it just sounds so common sense, but in the moment,
I know. And I'm not talking like I haven't made those kinds of decisions. I've made lots and lots of those kinds of decisions. And then afterwards, I'm like, what was I thinking? And it's true. I just didn't do due diligence. And I have such an ability to rationalize things to myself. So the thing that he says I think is really important is the due diligence. Sometimes it's true. You can't give a lot of time to the decision.
Right.
And other times you can. But he says there's two things that you want to look at to determine how much time you have to give the due diligence. One is, how good are we at seeing? As in, how discerning, how objective, how wise, how are we at noticing things? And some of us are better than other people. Like I'm really good at noticing things about people and relationships. I'm not so good about noticing things that are shiny and pretty. And like Peter is much more practical than I am from that standpoint. So that's one. And then the other thing is, how visible is the reality? So sometimes it takes digging.
Yes, it does.
To see what's really going on. I'll give an example. One thing I often help companies do is selection process. And I put people through the ringer, like multiple steps, because there's just so much that you can learn about the person that on the first meeting you can't tell. Because there's some people who interview really well.
Oh, yes.
And other people who don't. And you could go for the person who interviews well, but actually the person who doesn't interview well could end up be that hidden gem.
That's right.
So I put them through a process. Well, what I started to realize is often the companies would come to me, go, okay, we've got a candidate. Can you do the psychological evaluation, interview, all that stuff with this person? And I started to say to them, I will not do that unless you send me at least 2 or 3 candidates.
Right.
Because what happens is I will give you very accurate feedback on the person's strengths and weaknesses. But what happens is that they want that candidate so badly, they dismiss the weaknesses. And they just kind of, it's fine.
Or we can work with them.
Or we can work with them.
Their strengths kind of cover up for their weaknesses.
That's right.
But then you put them on a team.
That's right.
And it all goes to pot.
Yeah, because they're already invested in this client.
Yep. And they've done all the HR stuff that they think they need to do. And
That's right.
And that, in that situation, it's usually because there is a void that's left.
Right.
That they need to fill very quickly.
Yes.
And they're just not taking enough time. And this blindness to the information that you're providing, it's going to come out in the wash anyway.
Yeah, and it's very difficult, and that's why from now on I'm not doing that anymore, because they won't listen to me.
No, so what's the point?
Yeah.
And it's true. Like I find it's really hard to ask for input, especially when you want to move forward on a decision and your heart is set on it.
It's so true.
But that is, it must bug you that Peter can squash your dreams sometimes. But at the same time, we need people like that in our lives to go, hang on, let's slow this process down. And can I poke away at it a little bit with you?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And I've learned to value it. But the strategy is I have the idea, I throw it on the table, and then I run away because I can't handle that at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then after it has time to settle. So I'm at least wise enough to let things settle and I don't have to make a decision right away. So then I go back after the emotions have calmed down a little bit and he's got his questions ready for me. And he's learned to be more sensitive in how he questions it, because he has body language. He's kind of like, why would you do that?
I've seen that.
So it's not helpful. So he's just more like, well, tell me more about, and he just asks in an easier way for me to hear. And before you know it, I'm like, you're right, it's a stupid idea.
Yeah.
Or there's another option that I should be looking at I hadn't even considered. Right. So I value that so very, very much now.
So I think one of the things we can ask ourselves as individuals is, who is that person that speaks into our life that we trust their opinion, we value it, we know that they're for us. They're not just poo-pooing on our parade. And who is that person that we can ask?
Well, I would even expand it to say persons.
Yes,
because
of course.
If I'm asking Peter about something that affects him personally, say it's a financial decision, then he's not going to be as objective as you would be, because
Right.
it's not your money that's on the table.
Right.
So you ask me really good questions. So I find it's helpful to have input from other people. But at the end of the day, I also need to look at things myself and be discerning. Like, do I really want this? Why do I want that? What
Yeah.
values are aligned with this decision or not aligned with it?
Yeah.
And listening to my gut a little bit more, because often the answer kind of lies within, if I give myself space to think it through and I've asked the questions of people that I trust.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point, because I'm a gut-centered person. So I have gut reactions to things. They're not always accurate, obviously. And you're a heart-centered person.
Right.
So we're going to come at decisions kind of differently.
Yeah.
And then you get somebody like a Peter, who's in the thinking part. He's very thought-centered.
Yeah.
And so, between the three of us, we can sort each other out.
I think so. You're right. that makes sense. That really works. So I think the thing is, Henry Cloud talks about using the ready, aim, fire
I love this.
process, which is so good. It just helps you kind of remember the steps of how do you slow things down and really kind of go in with your eyes wide open. So
Before you start that, though,
sure.
I think it's good to ask, do I ready, aim, fire, or do I ready, aim, ready, aim? Like, there's some people that ready.
Yeah.
And they never, ever get to the point.
Paralysis
And then there's other
analysis.
people that
Yeah.
aim, fire, oh, I should have done some research, right? Right? And then there's some people that fire.
Yeah.
And they have no aim and they have no ready.
Yes.
So it's a good thing to ask
That
yourself.
is a really, so what would you say you are in general?
Because my gut, it can be a lot of aim. To make sure I'm hitting the mark.
Right.
Right? And I need to balance it with ready and then pulling the trigger.
Right. Yeah.
I can get stuck in the aim part.
Yeah. I'm definitely more of a fire person.
Yeah.
I get to the place of readiness pretty quickly.
But this is what you say to me all the time. Why do I do this to myself?
I know.
You say that to me every day, I think.
Time. I know. This morning you go, "Are you okay?" She's looking at me because my eyes are like I've been a little busy. And then you said to me, "You do this to yourself." Because I'm doing a lot of firing without ready.
So before we dig in, just ask yourself that question.
That's a really good
In
question.
the ready, aim, fire,
Yeah.
where do I prolong things? Where do I stay too short a time? And maybe where do I get stuck?
The other thing I would say is it depends on the decision.
Of course it does.
It seems like the more I have invested in it, the more cautious I can be, to the point where I can be paralyzed because I want to make the perfect decision, or there's a lot that's invested in it. So I think that it depends on the situation. So sometimes I'm just like ready, and I can't pull the trigger because I'm afraid of the consequences. This is what I'd like. That whatever decisions I make, I never have any negative consequences of
Well,
it.
that's not going to happen. So sorry, girl.
So that's why sometimes I can get stuck and ready.
Yes.
If it's something I really, really want, and when I reflect back on my life, sometimes that's where I can get paralyzed.
Right.
And then there's other things where I don't have as much invested in it, and I can be a little slightly impulsive.
Yeah. And so there's another good question.
Yeah.
Where are the realms
Yes.
of thinking and desires where we kind of bypass the system?
Right. And so ready is to be ready to make a good decisions means we know ourselves and our vulnerabilities.
Yes.
So I know that in certain areas, I'm going to be more vulnerable to making quick decisions. As a people pleaser, my vulnerability is saying yes far too quickly. And so I've got these checks and balances in place, including learning how to say no, or let me think about it, looking at my calendar with Peter, because he goes, you have all these things back. Just because there's a space doesn't mean you should fill it.
No.
Well,
Which you do.
I do. So I have to know my vulnerability around that. Now, I'm much better in making decisions that are more like the business type of decision. I'm not nearly as impulsive in there because it affects a whole range of people.
Yes.
I don't want to make a decision that's going to harm people in my realm that I'm working with.
So it's interesting that the people-pleasing part of you
Right.
will overburden yourself with the good opportunities
Yeah.
to not say no to somebody. But the people-forward part of you
Yeah.
will be protective
Yeah.
of people
Yeah.
when it comes to potential harm.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's this flippy-floppy.
It's a flippy floppy, but it's always about the people. So it's
it
good
is.
and bad, right?
Yeah.
So what would about yourself? So you know yourself, and what would be your vulnerabilities where you might do the ready piece?
The vulnerabilities for me are around being manipulated, right?
Yeah.
So I cannot go shopping when there's like big sales on because I feel like I'm being played.
You're right.
And then maybe I need the thing,
Right.
but like I feel like I'm not buying it because I feel I'm being manipulated.
So even if you wanted it and you needed it, you're going to say no to it just
Yes.
because you feel manipulated.
Yes.
Well, that's good to know about
So
yourself.
that's one thing. The other thing is in the area of vulnerabilities, I may not be as ready for relationships or,
Like opening up.
opening up.
Yeah.
Then because my ready is going, no,
Yeah,
no.
right.
Like alarm bells are going off or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. No, that's good. That's insightful. And then aim means that we know we have our goal and desire clearly in sight.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting one because you said you can aim sometimes at too many different places. So it sounds like you might not know what your actual desire is. And maybe you're responding or reacting to what you see are the needs out there or the battles that have to be fought
Right.
or whatever it might be. So it's externally driven versus internally driven based on
Yes.
what your goals are.
And it's always about others.
Oh, totally. That's a problem.
So the other week, a dog went missing in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
And a person had tried to get it off the road. It was running back and forth across a very busy road. I spent my entire day looking for that dog.
Yeah.
Like, just because I was worried about it, and I was worried that it had gotten hit by a car and it was limping. So I was worried that, it was going to just
Yeah.
injure itself even further. So that was an aim. Like,
Right.
I put everything else away.
Yeah.
And, we did find the dog eventually, but I spent the whole day looking for that dog. Mm-hmm. So it's always about, for me, it's about that advocacy, the vulnerable,
Yeah.
somebody's in trouble. And so I can see how I can push other things that are important aside in order to zone in. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's not always up to me.
No. Yeah, it's how our strengths can then lead us to aim at the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And for me too, if I'm not really thinking about what I want or what my personal goals are,
Yeah.
I have a tendency to just react to what's happening outside.
That's right.
Or I will go towards wherever there's the biggest pressure or wherever there's more demands placed on me.
Right.
Yeah.
So the ready part,
Yeah.
know
Yep.
our vulnerabilities, know ourselves well, and probably have some structures in place so that we know when we're ready, right?
Yeah.
And then the aim part is the same thing. To, I don't want to delay the aim, but at the same time, I want to make sure I'm aiming at the right thing
At the right thing.
and using my
That's a
energy
big
wisely.
Yeah. And then the fire, he does remind us that we can never be 100% certain
No.
and we're going to have to take the risk.
Yeah, you have to at some point trust yourself and trust the counsel that you've received.
Right.
That it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Or else nothing would ever happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a bit of a spectrum from impulsive to overly cautious and
Yes.
finding what it is. As long as you've done your due diligence, you've gathered as much information as you possibly can. 'Cause
Yeah.
there's just some things you can't access. You can't predict the future. As much as I'd like to, you can't. And knowing ourselves well, knowing what our goals are, playing it out. What is our long-term, where do we see our lives going if we choose this, especially if they're big decisions?
Yeah, exactly.
So if I'm choosing to, a person's choosing a partner, it's like play it out. Like what's their life going to be like with them? And then when you're ready, you just sometimes have to take the plunge.
Yeah.
Right?
So again, that we owe it to ourselves to do this piece, because the consequences of not going through the proper steps can be very detrimental to us.
It can be. And then at the same token, if we don't go forward with it, that can also be detrimental. That can keep us stuck. It can mean that we don't make use of great opportunities. No. And also depends on what stage you are in your life.
Yes,
like
it does.
If you're at the stage of learning something new and you really can't have insight, you don't know what you don't know.
That's right.
You might have to give yourself permission to do some experimenting in small ways. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try that and see if I like this. See if I don't like that. And so that's as much as you can, gather the information to be able to do that. But the main thing is go in with your eyes wide open.
Yeah.
And going in with your eyes wide open doesn't mean that you don't make decisions that are sometimes hard decisions, or decisions that going into it is going to be some pain associated with it. I say this all the time in relationships. When I go in with my eyes wide open, I know the person's strengths and weaknesses, and I still choose to be in relationship with them. And I still choose to show them grace within that, because otherwise we'll be waiting around forever to find a perfect friend or partner or business partner. So that's going in with your eyes wide open and counting the costs, and then saying, I'm willing to pay the cost for this.
And the one thing that strikes me about this conversation too is that this is a learned behavior.
Right.
Some of us are just impulsive.
Yeah.
And some of us are more cautious. And so we can learn to think differently. We can learn to look at things from different angles.
Yeah.
And it is a learned behavior, especially people who suffer from FOMO.
Yeah.
We can slow them down and learn some behaviors that are very good for them. So that's number one. But the other thing is, why do I owe myself these three things? The ready, aim, fire.
Right.
Like looking back at the patterns in my life, what repetitive patterns have got me into trouble where I've got stuck on one of these things.
Right.
Because if I can be honest with myself, then I can go, wow, I've been really slow to fire on some critical things.
Yeah.
Or I haven't done my due diligence in the ready department before I've aimed.
Yeah.
That could have saved me a lot of drama.
That's right. And I think that's the homework, is to really do the analysis around where you are with the ready, aim, fire.
Yeah.
Know yourself well, know your goals well. I mean, that's a process right there. But I like what you said about going back and looking at your patterns, because you're the consistent person in the patterns. And instead of always blaming events or other people or things outside of yourself, the thing that's so amazing about this is that you do have agency. And if you can recognize your part that you play in it.
Yes. And stay tuned, because we've got a doozy coming up about that.
Yes, we do. So thanks for tuning in. Again, why do we do this to ourselves? But thank you for hanging in there with us, because there's some other ones that are coming that are even more challenging. Yes. I might actually just not talk and let Gillian do all the talking on some of those.
I'll just talk to the chair?
Yeah, talk to the chair. I might not be here in the next video, just so you know, because the next one is just, but it's worth it. So tune in.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Fully Lived Life podcast. We hope you found it encouraging and helpful. Be sure to follow or subscribe so that you never miss a new episode. And if you enjoyed our show, please help spread the word by sharing with your friends and family and posting on your social media. Thanks for listening, and tune in to our next episode.